Hi everyone, my name is Hyunji Lee. I'm a second year doctoral student in the Counseling Psychology program at Georgia State University. Today I'm going to be doing my ancestry presentation on Dr. Gilbert Wren. So I know it's kind of small, but there's going to be a PDF with just this map of my academic ancestry. And so just to zoom in for you guys, Dr. Gilbert Wren, who I'm going to be presenting on today, is right here underneath Dr. E.K. Strong. He received his PhD at Stanford University, and at the top here is my advisor, Dr. Colleen DeBlair. Just kind of a fun fact I wanted to share with you guys. I was an undergraduate student at the University of Florida, and so Dr. DeBlair, my advisor at Georgia State, her mentor, Dr. Bonnie Marotti, was a professor of mine in a human sexuality class when I was a college student. So definitely these linkages with academic ancestry is an interesting one. But that was kind of my fun fact. Today we'll be focusing, again, as I said, on Dr. Charles Gilbert Wren. So Dr. Wren was born in New Paris, Ohio in 1902. Here's a picture of him to the left. He spent his childhood in Florida and returned to Ohio to work in World War I plants when he was 16 years old. And so this really early experience working influenced Dr. Wren and his career as a psychologist, and I'll be touching on that a little bit later. He first attended a school called Athens School, which is now called Tennessee Wesleyan College, and here he finished his bachelor's degree and eventually moved on to Willamette University. He married a woman named Kathleen LaRoute the day after his college graduation. So a little bit about Dr. Wren's early career. When he was done with receiving his bachelor's degree, he actually didn't go straight into work as an academic or as a psychologist. He worked as an ordained deacon at a church, and this religious context influenced Dr. Wren's work a lot. In some of his publications, he mentioned how this was the first place where he really learned the importance of taking care of and loving human beings in an unconditional way. And this was heavily influenced kind of by Dr. Wren's Christian ideals, which later again influenced his scholarship as well as his advocacy. After he worked as an ordained deacon, he was actually the principal of a high school for a little bit. And again, this kind of fed into Dr. Wren's work as a psychologist because he worked with young people, so adolescents, and he was heavily influenced by, again, his time as a principal. As I mentioned a little bit before, Dr. Wren's theoretical orientation, research, and general work as a psychologist really focused on the unconditional care and the well-being of others. And he was also really interested in vocational psychology because this tied into how Dr. Wren conceptualized people's meaning making and how they found purpose in life. So he officially began his graduate studies at Stanford University. He received his master's degree first in educational psychology and vocational guidance, and then he continued into his doctoral studies, earning a PhD in personnel psychology in 1932. And this was kind of when counseling psychology was not established yet as a strong field, and so he worked mostly in kind of the vocational psychology space. He was mentored by E.K. Strong, and we are really familiar with this last name because of the strong interest inventory, as well as W.C. Wells. Dr. Wren served as a vocational counselor at Stanford also during his doctoral studies and completed his dissertation that was titled Study of Vocational Goals and Self-Confidence Level of 10,000 Junior College Students of High and Low Levels of Academic Ability. After he was finished with his PhD, he immediately began as an assistant professor at Stanford. But a little bit later, he transitioned into working for the University of Minnesota, and he had a dual appointment here as an assistant director of the General College, but also as an assistant director of the institutional research. Kind of organization there, and he worked as an associate professor. So, just kind of doing this leadership role as well as teaching as a professor. He was shortly thereafter promoted to a full professor of educational psychology. There are a ton of contributions to talk about when it comes to Dr. Wren. He really was a pioneer for the field of counseling psychology, but a little bit just kind of about the things that he's done in scholarship. He's authored 8 books, he's published over 140 professional articles, wrote into 41 chapters of other books, wrote like short booklets that were meant to be given to practitioners in the field to be practically helpful for their work with clients and students. And he also had other varying publications, which has been translated into languages all over the world. He also edited 42 professional texts as an editorial advisor for Houghton Mifflin. And Dr. Wren and his wife established the Gilbert and Kathleen Wren Award for the American Personnel and Guidance Association. And the recipients of this award were to be characterized as people who are giving to others and acts with integrity, which also speaks to Dr. Wren's character and the things that he's valued as an individual as well. Dr. Wren also mentored 87 doctoral students in his career, and they all have become leaders in the field of counselor education and counseling psychology. A little bit more again about Dr. Wren's professional contributions. He was recognized as a respected scholar all over the world. He was a visiting professor in 19 different universities in the U.S. and 4 even overseas, which is really incredible for kind of the era that he lived in, and just even the exposure that he had to other cultures and other countries, and the fact that his work was respected overseas as well. He also served as the president of several professional organizations, and this was actually all within kind of a 4-year period, which again speaks to Dr. Wren's productivity. He was the president of the National Vocational Guidance Association and the American College Personnel Association, and also the Division 17 of APA, which is the counseling psych division. And it was actually during his presidency that he established a new model of training for counseling psychologists. And this new model was what led for the division name change into counseling psychology from counseling and guidance. And so just kind of establishing counseling psych as a field again as a pioneer. And this was really significant because it placed counseling psych up to par with a more popular version of psychology that back then, which was clinical psych. And then Dr. Wren, along with Super, Han, and Seashore, started the seminal journal in the counseling psych field, which is JCP, Journal of Counseling Psychology, and this happened in 1954. Dr. Wren served as the journal's first editor for 10 years, and JCP still remains kind of the premier journal of our field. And I didn't write out all the awards that Dr. Wren has received, but again, he was a recipient of many distinguished awards. His significance of the discipline, I feel like his professional contributions kind of have said it all, but he really stood out within kind of this just psychology as a field in general, because during his time there was a very heavy emphasis on pathologizing and the medical model and diagnosing of patients. But Dr. Wren really stood out because he took a person-centered approach, and his approach brought about a new era in counselor training. And as I mentioned before, he really placed counseling psychology on equal footing with clinical psychology, and this was really significant because this was at a time when there was a lot of federal funds that were being granted to training professional and applied psychologists. And again, to just explain a little bit more about his person-centered approach, this really shaped counseling psych as a field and our identity as counseling psychologists as being a strengths based approach when it comes to our practice and advocacy for our clients and students and patients. And it really established a sense of what counseling psychologists stood for as an entire discipline. He also addressed many complex aspects that influence working with the people that we serve in counseling, and he explored different individualistic factors that influence our work with as counselors, such as self-concept. He published a really interesting article about self-concept into the therapeutic relationship, and his kind of expansion of different factors that can impact our relationship with our clients really showed to me that Ren was a scholar who was obviously very like self-reflective in the process of who he was and how he identified, not just as a psychologist but as a researcher and as a scholar as well. And one specific reading that really stood out to me was an excerpt of thoughts that he published titled Some Things I Have Learned and Am Still Learning. And in this article, he emphasized a couple of lessons that he has learned. In his work as a psychologist up until that point. And some of that included his kind of coming to terms with the cruelty and injustice of the world, but also being able to equally hold kind of this attitude of generosity, advocacy, and humility, and these thoughts and this person-centered orientation also helped Dr. Ren to be really one of the first, I believe, like feminist psychologist, because he really believes strongly in kind of the equal rights among women and men, and so really just dedicated to social justice, which again is a very important value in the field of counseling psychology. Some of the connections that I made with some of the psychologists and scholars that we've learned about so far was first with William James. We know that James published a lot of content that makes applied psychology possible. So some of the things that William James published, like attention, memory, self or concept, things like that, Dr. Wren really inherited these works from William James and made it possible so that psychologists can be scientist practitioners that can use psychology and these kind of preliminary concepts of psychology to benefit the lives of people. Another connection that I made was with Dr. Stanley Hall. We know that Dr. Hall started the APA and served as its first president, and as I mentioned before, Dr. Wren also served as president of many psychological organizations and counseling organizations himself. And so they're really pioneering leaders in the field who established footing for psychologists for many generations to come. Dr. Hall also started the first psychological journal, and I thought there was a parallel with the fact that Dr. Wren was also a part of a team of psychologists that started JCP, the Journal of Counseling Psychology. So that's about it with Dr. Gilbert Wren. Thank you so much for listening, and here are some of my references.